In this video, we are going to step through or do a kind of code along for section 414 basic graphics in your Zybook. Our goal is to create this histogram viewer. So what we are going to do is to create a J frame, and inside the J frame, we're going to add a J component. And that J component is what's going to allow us to create these histograms. And the histogram is literally just drawing a rectangle on the screen. So we are working with drawing shapes such as rectangles, circles, etc. Our first step is going to be to create the J-frame. And remember, you have to import the Java swing.jframe. And then we set the size of the frame so you can adjust the width and the height of the frame. You can give the frame a title by using appFrame.setTitle. AppFrame is the name of your J-frame that you created, so that's a name that you create. And then you always have to tell it what to do when you close the program, and then you have to make it visible, otherwise it's not going to work. Now, one of the nice things here is I can actually copy this code right over into Eclipse. If you noticed, I copied everything, including main. So when I bring it over into Eclipse, a couple of things that I could do. If you notice, I named mine Zybook Graphic 2D Demo. And so I'm not going to use their class name. And I already have the swing class imported. I'm going to delete that curly brace. So I need to do just a little tweaking here in order to get this to work. You sometimes have an extra curly brace on the bottom if you do this, but I must have not done that. So we should be good. So if I execute this code then, so I just copied and pasted that over. And if I execute this code, I get an empty frame. And so an empty frame is my title. That's what shows up there at the top. And then this is the size, 400 by 250. So 400 is longer than the height, which is 250. And then this JFrame exit on close, this set right here is telling the computer what to do when you hit the close button. Okay, so when I do that, it runs behind the scenes whatever needs to be executed when that is done. The next thing we talk about is adding a J component to our project. And a J component is just a blank screen. It's like a blank sheet of paper. When we create a J component, you have to name it. It's a separate class. It will be a separate file that you create, and it extends J component. You need the imports, graphics, graphics 2D, and then your J component from the swing class. The one thing I want you to notice here is when you pass in a graphics object, it immediately, the first thing that we do is we cast it to a graphics 2D object. The reason for that is to have the benefits of additional methods that are available in graphics 2D. This will be the difference between the Zybook example and then the other example, which was the stoplight example in our course. So this is the generic format for that. As I scroll through our Zybook, we are going to create a J component that's a histogram. So we are going to take this code and apply it to our project. They've added a few additional libraries. There's a color library, and then we've added the rectangle. So we can work with drawing rectangles because our goal is to create a histogram. And a histogram is just a bar chart and thus uses rectangles. So we need to create 3 bins or 3 rectangles. A couple of things I want to point out here is that we are going to then create our class named histogram component because you want to name that class according to what it does. Next, we already kind of talked about using the fact that it casts it to a graphics 2D object. So the object G, which was a graphics, gets cast to a graphics 2D object. And then we start to make our rectangles. So when you draw on the screen, what we need to understand is that blank screen that we get, the upper left-hand corner is 0, 0. So like if I were saying this is my screen, this point right up here in the top left is 0, 0. And then I go to the right positive and I go down positive. So just like when we created our blank component, let's go back to the 2D demo here. And if I execute this, so 0, 0 is up here in the top left-hand corner. And when I go to the right, I go positive. And when I go down, I go positive. And so that's why this bottom corner, for example, is 400 to 50. So when you are planning out components on this screen, and what's going to happen is you're going to have a J frame, which is what this is. And inside of that, you're going to have a J component. And on the J component, you're going to draw the rectangles for our bar graph. You won't like quote see the J component. I suppose there's probably a way that you can outline it or whatever. It's going to look like everything's just built inside here, but it's really a J component inside the J frame. So let's go back and take a look at that code and actually just steal that code. So I'm going to copy this code and kind of, and go play with that over in Eclipse. So this code needs to be put in a separate file. So we need to create a new class for it. And I'm just going to call it histogram. I'm not going to include a main because it is not a main program. And I'm going to paste everything I brought over. And then a couple of things. I'm going to scroll up. And if we notice, I don't need my name anymore because I can use histogram component, but I have to do the quick fix and rename. So if you watch on the left-hand side, histogram will get renamed as histogram component if I choose to do a quick fix. So now I have those files within my project. And this is not the best way to organize your project. I'm just throwing everything into the default package. That's not really the best thing to do, but it's everything inside my module 4. So that's how I'm organizing right now. So once I have my histogram component created, so let's take a look at deep dive a little bit at one rectangle. So I'm going to start a rectangle at 1010. It's going to be 200 long and 50 high. If you look, every single rectangle that's created is 50 high, and that makes sense because they should all be uniformly kind of high, but their lengths are different, which is this 200, 150, 350. Their starting locations are all starting at to the right 10. The first one is down 10. The next one is starts to the right 10, but down 75. So this is the starting corner of the second histogram, and this is the starting corner of the third histogram. When you do draw components like this, you literally probably want to get a sheet of graph paper out and map it out and try to plan where your coordinates are. It's going to save you a ton of time, okay? And then here's why they use the color class. They are actually creating a random color, and that random color is using what we call an RGB value. So that's a blend of red, green, blue. And so this is 128 red, 128 green, and 0 blue for that color. They set the color. So you create the color first, then you set the color, and then we fill the rectangle. So every single rectangle is going to do the same. We create a rectangle, we create a color, we set the color, and then we fill the rectangle in order to create this component. So this is the actual drawing. So for example, if you were creating a face, you could name this, I'm going to call this my face or something like that. So this is how you are drawing on your blank sheet of paper. You're literally telling it, put your pen down here, draw the rectangle, 200 to the right, 50 down, fill it with this color, or set the color and then fill it with that color. And so every single object that you draw has to have, be defined kind of this way. This is the example for the rectangle, and these are the arguments for a rectangle. And then back in our main project, we're going to have to add this histogram component to the main project. jump back to our Zybooks. In order to add the histogram component, you create a new histogram component, and then we add the histogram component to the frame, and then we set it to visible. So I'm going to create a new histogram component, and I am going to add that to the frame. I need to go back and look. So we got title, and so after we set the default close, we're going to add the histogram component to the frame. So app frame is our frame, and we're going to add left parens histogram component, semicolon. If we execute this now, we have our bar graph. So we can see that it drew the shape that we just described. 3 rectangles moving to the right, the different sizes and stuff, etc. So glancing back at our Zybook, they step through and talk about each one of those items. They give you some practice exercises. They talk about the grid, etc. And then they give you a few other maybe things that you could work on or look at.